Hello fellow cyborgs, I'm here today for another book review, or in this case it may end up being more of a book discussion, and this will be about Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami, translated by J. Rubin. Silent room, guitar, disruptive calisthenics, alive, alive, up. So you know that this is the first Murakami that I read. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because I did really enjoy it. I loved the slowness of it and the melancholy, and some of the language was absolutely beautiful. The ruminations on death and suicide, which crop up a lot in this book because suicide is almost a theme in this book, was really profound and beautiful. I was really uncomfortable with the female characters in this novel though, and so I kind of wanted to just hash it out with you a little bit. The premise of Norwegian Wood is that Toru meets up with a woman of his past, Naoko, who is having some mental difficulties, and they start a relationship. And it's not just a romantic relationship, it's just their lives start to mix and they become important to one another. They aren't with each other through a lot of this book because Naoko goes to a mental health retreat. And Toru visits her, but he also ends up meeting other people in this book. Along the way, he's at school while she's at this retreat. As I said, it's slow and melancholy, and it's from Toru's perspective, and it's his just slow and melancholy life and the interesting people that he meets and how he goes from day to day, and him worrying about Naoko and writing her letters and trying to do studies and also meeting other people, and not a ton happens in this. So there are 3 main female characters in this novel. There's Naoko, Midori, and Reiko. Reiko is the roommate of Naoko at the mental health retreat that Toru visits, and she's an older woman who has been at the retreat for many years, and she is most at peace at this retreat. She feels disconnected from the outside world, doesn't think she would fit in there much anymore. Naoko was the girlfriend of Toru's best friend, who at the beginning of this novel you learn killed himself the year before. And then Midori is a student that Toru meets at university, and he also begins a friendship relationship with. I'm going to warn you right now, there are going to be mild spoilers coming up in this review. I can't really discuss why I had issues with the female characters without getting more into their plot lines. Now, I'm not going to go into any big twists or anything like that. And this is a plot that you can't really spoil. This is a book that you just read as a journey rather than the destination of the end. But if you're super sensitive, do I have a hat? So for those of you who are very sensitive to spoilers, but still want to hear whatever else I have to say at the end of the novel, I am going to wear my spoiler hat whilst I'm talking about spoilers, okay? So when this comes off, then unmute or go to that part in the video. All right. Do you like what my bangs are doing? Hats and bangs, guys, hats and bangs. This is not helpful. Naoko, I flip-flopped whilst reading this between understanding her and feeling like she was a caricature of herself. Many times in this novel, Naoko just stops and gazes intently into Toru's eyes. And it's so soulfully and melancholically. She seemed a little manic pixie dream girly in that distance from Toru and in how he perceived her as almost this otherworldly creature that he just could never comprehend. But she didn't seem a creature of depth, just of otherworldliness, which I wasn't a huge fan of, obviously. She's a really interesting character. She's got a really tumultuous mental backstory and present. I mean, she's very ill throughout this entire book. And yet, a lot of the times I felt that Murakami didn't realistically explore that enough. And I could never, ever in this book think of Naoko as anything other than a woman. She was never a human going through these mental turmoils or anything like that. She was always a young woman. She was a woman with a mental illness. She was a depressed woman. She was an ill woman. And I don't know if that's just how Murakami does it. I think it is. I've seen some discussions on his work, and female characters is something that he's not like super great at. I don't know if it's also part of the culture. That's also a possibility. I know very little about the Japanese culture, so I am an ignorant mess in that respect. But that was definitely something I was a little uncomfortable with, just because my personal life theory is that gender and sex shouldn't matter, and people should connect on, like, not to sound corny, but like a spirit or soul level. Who you are, your mind, your experiences is what makes you you. Your gender informs that, but you should first and foremost always be seen as a human being or a person rather than a man or a woman or etc. Then we've got Midori, who was also very woman. She was a really interesting character in her like sexual comfortableness. There's a couple times in this where she, I think at the time jokingly, but also seriously, asks Toro to think about her when next he's masturbating, and she's really interested in seeing porno flicks and stuff like that. She's not a nymphomaniac by any means. I think she's just really curious about human sexuality, and when this was written, which I think was in the 60s, or not written, but when it was taking place, which was the 60s, I think. I don't reckon that there was very much openness about learning about human sexuality. I don't remember when Kinsey did his huge study, but it was like somewhere around there. So human sexuality studies were at its infancy, and if that was something that you were interested in, you kind of just had to work with what you had, which was guy friends asking them to picture you while masturbating and seeing how that went for them, and watching porn movies at porno theaters. So, you know, I don't have a problem with that. But I thought that aspect of her became exaggerated to the point of ridiculousness almost, and not fully explained. Like, I'm giving her the background that maybe she's interested in human sexuality and this is why she's acting this way, but Murakami does nothing to explain that. It's just like, oh, that's just Midori. There's this one aspect toward the end of this novel where Toru's incredibly depressed and hasn't communicated with Midori in weeks, and so he finally gives her a call and she agrees to go and meet him, and he's still completely despondent and depressed, but he just doesn't want to neglect her anymore. But he is not present. He is still completely within himself, having a horrible time. Midori takes umbrage to the fact that he is not paying attention to her and that he didn't recognize that she got a haircut, so she tells him that she needs to go to another appointment but leaves him a note saying, you didn't even notice me, and I know you're in a tough place, and I wish there was something I could do for you, but bye, you're a jerk, don't talk to me. Midori's his only friend, best friend at that point, like only confidant. And the fact that she notices that he's in a bad place and wishes that she could help him, but then just can't be bothered because he didn't recognize that she got a haircut. And that was just extremely selfish. And I was really not expecting that from her. I don't know if there was evidence enough in previous encounters with her that that's an aspect of her personality, because she's really selfless when caring for her father and caring for her family. But then with Toru, she's just like, well, you're not going to be happy and interested in me. Have fun with your problems. Call me later, but actually don't, because I hate your guts now. It seemed really stupid, really out of character, incredibly selfish, as I said. And I really hated that so much. I hated it for Toru, but I also didn't understand why it was there. And then Toru's response to her, instead of saying, I guess she's not really my friend, he has to like grovel to get her back in his life. And their relationship, I found, was not really founded on any connection between them. I didn't understand them, and I was really disappointed that Toru would let her treat him like that. Perhaps I just didn't understand something in their relationship, but I didn't find enough evidence in the text for me to be on board with, no, you have to get her back, even though you didn't do anything wrong. And then finally, we've got Reiko, Naoko's roommate, as I said before. The thing that bothered me about Reiko and Toru's relationship is that at the very end of the book, they have sex. At this point, Toru is still in love with Naoko and in love with Midori and is having, he's having a tough time still. I know that them having sex came out of a place of healing, but at this point in the novel, I was sitting there going, what is so awesome about Toru? Because he's the eyes through which you see the plot of the novel and these women, but he's kind of a blank slate. And he kind of doesn't do anything. And he's kind of not that interesting. And yet he has these women who just orbit his life and seem so interested in him. And in Reiko's case, has connected with him so deeply that they share this sensual and caring moment. But I didn't get it. I didn't get it at all. And I don't know if Toru is like a Gary Stu version of Haruki Murakami. And so he's, transplanting himself into the narrative and wants to have that special something where people just connect with you or I don't know. It seemed really unnecessary at that point though. I thought that for being a generally flat character, Toru was getting a lot of action and a lot of interest by people that without earning it to be mean about it. So, female characters and Toru and naked times. I don't know. Okay, you're safe now. Welcome back. So I had those problems with those characters. I'm spoiler-free wrapping up what I said. How they were inexplicably torn to Toru, who I thought was kind of a wet blanket most of the time and not very interesting, and how I didn't understand their motivations and their actions for some of the things that they did. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, so regardless of those weird things that at the time I was uncomfortable with, there was no way I could give this 3 out of 5 stars because it was such an enjoyable, calming read with some really beautiful segments, one of which I'm going to read to you now. So this is on page 33, so it's not a major spoiler, even though it's going to talk about stuff that's not on the back of the book, all right? Death exists, not as the opposite, but as a part of life. Translated into words, it's a cliché, but at the time I felt it not as words, but as that knot of air inside me. Death exists in a paperweight, in 4 red and white balls on a billiard table, and we go on living and breathing it into our lungs like fine dust. Until that time I had understood death as something entirely separate from and independent of life. The hand of death is bound to take us, I had felt, but until the day it reaches out for us, it leaves us alone. This had seemed to me the simple, logical truth. Life is here, death is over there. I am here, not over there. The night Kizuki died, however, I lost the ability to see death and life in such simple terms. Death was not the opposite of life. It was already here. Within my being, it had always been here, and no struggle would permit me to forget that. When it took the 17-year-old Kizuki that night in May, death took me as well. I underlined that section on page 33 because it just took my breath away, and that's when I knew I needed to pay attention. This was going to be awesome. So because of things like that, and because it's slow and calming melancholy, it talks about important things like suicide and death and pain and grief. And it does so in a way that doesn't destroy you, but it makes it clear and it makes you think about it. That is why this got 4 out of 5 stars. And this is why I will read more Haruki Murakami. It's an eventuality. It's going to happen, and I'm sure I'm going to enjoy the heckadoodles out of some of his magical realism stuff. So that is my discussion/review of Norwegian Wood, my first Murakami. I hope you enjoyed this review. In the comments down below, I would greatly appreciate some Japanese fiction recommendations, be it any other Murakami novels that I should put in the upper echelons of my TBR, or some unrelated Japanese fiction. But I think that Japanese fiction and I are gonna jive like I never did at a prom, and I would love some guidance from you. Thank you for watching, and until next time, continue to be lovely. Well, that happened.